Every day you believe you are making choices freely. You decide what to wear, which career to pursue, who to spend your time with. You tell yourself, this is me, this is my life. But beneath that polished surface, something else lurks. Something older, darker, more primal. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the instincts, fears, impulses, and desires that society has taught you to bury. The terrifying truth is this: what you suppress doesn't vanish. The shadow doesn't dissolve just because you pretend it isn't there. Instead, it waits, shaping your choices in silence, bending your will in directions you don't see, until one day you realize the mask you've been wearing, the persona you call yourself, is only a costume. And the director of your play is not your conscious self, but the hidden forces you've refused to confront. The first mask every man wears is the persona. Jung described it as the social face we show the world, the role we play to be accepted. It's the charming colleague, the respectable father, the disciplined student. The persona is not a lie. It's necessary. Without it, society would collapse into chaos. But the problem is that you begin to mistake the mask for your identity. You start to believe the polite, obedient face you've crafted is who you truly are. And everything that doesn't fit the mask, that gets pushed into the dark basement of your psyche. Your shadow, the aggression you weren't allowed to express, the ambition you were told was arrogance, the lust you were told was shameful, the rage you swallowed every time you obeyed instead of resisted. All of it lives in the shadow, whispering to you when you think you're in control. Repression is the price society demands for belonging. From childhood, you were taught not to be too much. Don't be too loud, too angry, too defiant. Boys don't cry, but they also must not rage. You learn to cut off the edges of yourself to fit into the narrow mold handed down by parents, teachers, bosses, governments. Society doesn't want whole men, it wants tame ones. So it teaches you to amputate pieces of yourself and call it maturity. But amputated instincts don't die, they return in disguise. The man who suppresses his anger doesn't become peaceful. He becomes quietly resentful, exploding one day in rage over something trivial. The man who denies his ambition doesn't become humble. He becomes envious of those who dared to pursue theirs. Every polite smile hides a set of clenched teeth. Every forced laugh conceals a scream that was never allowed to escape. Think of the respectable politician who preaches virtue but is later exposed in scandal. Or the family man who never raised his voice until one day he burns his life to the ground in a fit of violence. These men are not hypocrites in the simple sense. They are prisoners of their own repression. Their shadows, ignored for too long, erupted and seized control. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The very decisions you think are rational, your career, your marriage, your faith, may simply be the invisible strings of your shadow pulling you toward what it has always desired. Nietzsche saw this long before psychology gave it a name. He argued that much of morality is nothing more than disguised will to power. What society calls virtue is often the castration of instincts, a way for the weak to control the strong. Meekness, obedience, humility. These weren't universal truths. They were strategies, chains disguised as halos. By forcing men to repress their primal drives, society ensured compliance, not greatness. And yet, Nietzsche didn't call for abandoning morality altogether. He demanded that man confront his instincts directly, transcend them rather than deny them. The overman was not a saintly figure, but one who could integrate his chaos into creative power. Here, he and Jung converge. The shadow isn't an enemy to be slaughtered, but a force to be recognized, disciplined, and integrated into the self. So what does this mean for you? It means that the choices you make today may not be yours at all. They may belong to the mask you've been wearing, to the rules you've obeyed, to the shadow you've refused to confront. Every time you play the polite man, the obedient man, the smiling man, remember, your shadow hasn't disappeared. It's watching. It's waiting. And every suppressed impulse will one day demand its price. The truth is brutal, but liberating. The mask you call yourself is not you. It's only the beginning. Beneath it lies the shadow, and until you confront it, you are not free. You are a puppet wearing a smile. The persona is not your enemy, but neither is it your true self. It is only a mask, and every mask eventually cracks. The man who cannot face the shadow will be devoured by it. The man who does, however, gains access to a depth of power, authenticity, and freedom most will never touch. The first step is simple, but terrifying. Stop mistaking the mask for your identity. Stop pretending the shadow isn't there. Look into the darkness, and you may discover that the thing you feared all along, the impulses you buried, are not your downfall but your path to becoming whole. The most dangerous betrayal is not the one that comes from others. It's the betrayal that comes from inside. You think you're choosing stability when you take the job that drains your soul. You think you're choosing virtue when you suppress your anger. You convince yourself you're being responsible, when in reality you are building a cage with your own hands. But what if those decisions aren't yours at all? What if every rational explanation you give yourself is just the shadow, pulling the strings in silence? Carl Jung warned us, what you repress will not vanish. It will control you more powerfully than what you face. The shadow you deny becomes the master of your choices, disguising sabotage as wisdom, weakness as morality, and fear as prudence. Every man has experienced this silent sabotage. You tell yourself you don't want confrontation, so you stay silent in meetings. You say it's humility, but the truth is fear. You call your lack of ambition contentment, but underneath it festers envy of those who dared to want more. This is the shadow at work, bending your choices so that you betray yourself while believing you are doing the right thing. Self-denial doesn't make you noble. It makes you dangerous, first to yourself and eventually to others. When you suffocate your instincts, they don't die. They rot, and the stench leaks into your life as passive aggression, addiction, compulsions, and destructive habits. You think you're keeping the shadow locked away, but in reality, you're handing it the keys to your life. Consider the man who prides himself on being good. He never argues, never raises his voice, never risks defiance. For years, he wears the mask of virtue, convincing everyone, including himself, that he is peace embodied. But repression is a time bomb. One day, something small, a traffic jam, a careless insult, a broken promise, lights the fuse. Suddenly, decades of buried rage erupt, and this good man becomes a monster. The violence shocks everyone because they never saw it coming. But the truth is that the eruption was inevitable. A lifetime of betrayal always ends in catastrophe. Jung's insight was brutal. The shadow doesn't disappear simply because you deny it. The more you repress it, the more it grows in power. And the longer you hide it, the more violently it will one day demand to be seen. Another trick of the shadow is projection. Jung observed that we often despise most in others the very qualities we have hidden within ourselves. You mock the arrogant man because you fear your own ambition. You condemn the selfish because you repress your own desires. You scorn the impulsive because you have buried your own hunger for freedom. Projection is the shadow's way of tricking you into waging war with yourself through other people. The enemy you see out there is often nothing more than a reflection of the enemy you've refused to face within. This is why you can't stop thinking about the colleague you resent or the friend you secretly envy. It isn't about them. It's about you. Nietzsche called this poison resentment, the twisted moral code of the powerless. Instead of admitting their own weakness, they rebranded it as virtue. Unable to express strength, they declared strength to be evil. Unable to admit envy, they disguised it as morality. Nietzsche's words cut deep. Morality itself, he argued, is often nothing more than the revenge of the weak against the strong. And here lies the trap for the modern man. You convince yourself your choices are virtuous, humble, responsible, moral. But look closer. Are they born of strength or of fear? Do they spring from your will or from the shadow's manipulation? Resentment is the philosophy of the betrayed self, a man rewriting his own cowardice into a story of righteousness. This is why the betrayal within is more dangerous than the betrayal from outside. An enemy you can see, you can fight. But the shadow is invisible, silent, embedded in your very thoughts. It makes you choose chains while whispering that you are free. It convinces you to settle for less, and then applauds your restraint. It turns you into your own executioner, applauding each sacrifice you make in the name of false virtue. The man who never confronts this truth will spend his life sabotaging himself. He will live in envy while preaching humility. He will burn with resentment while insisting he has no desires. He will obey every rule while quietly dreaming of rebellion. And in the end, he will wonder why his life feels wasted, as if some hidden part of him has been laughing in the dark all along. The shadow is not your enemy because it is dark. It is your enemy because it is hidden. The more you deny it, the more it turns against you. The betrayal that ruins men's lives is not society's betrayal, nor women's betrayal, nor fortune's betrayal. It is their own. Jung's warning remains as urgent as ever. Until you face the unconscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. To reclaim yourself, you must first admit this brutal truth. Every time you silence your instincts, every time you bury your anger, every time you deny your hunger, you are betraying yourself. And no enemy on earth can destroy a man as completely as a man at war with himself. You were taught that discipline is strength. Work hard, stay controlled, sacrifice desire. From the classroom to the workplace, from religion to self-help gurus, the message is the same. Crush your instincts, and you will rise above them. But what if that discipline isn't strength at all? What if it's a prison, one where you've locked away the fiercest parts of yourself? Carl Jung warned us that when the shadow is denied, it doesn't weaken, it grows monstrous. And history is littered with the corpses of disciplined men who crumbled into chaos because they never confronted their hidden selves. The paradox is clear. True independence doesn't come from rejecting desire, but from facing it, wrestling with it, and integrating it into who you are. This is the essence of Jung's idea of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It is not about destroying the shadow or denying desire. It is about integration. To cut away your instincts is to amputate half of yourself. But to acknowledge them, to understand them, to channel them, that is where strength lives. Men are often trapped in the false dichotomy of discipline versus desire. Society tells you to pick a side. Either you give in to temptation and are ruled by it, or you suppress it entirely and wear the crown of control. But both paths are prisons. The man enslaved by indulgence is weak. The man enslaved by repression is hollow. Jung's insight is that the real path is neither indulgence nor repression. It is mastery through integration. Look at St. Augustine. In his Confessions, he writes of a life torn between sin and holiness. He sought pleasure in youth, then swung violently to asceticism, renouncing flesh, desire, and instinct. But even in his saintly life, he was haunted by temptation. His shadow never vanished. It remained, gnawing at him. Augustine's struggle wasn't unique. It is the story of countless men who swing from indulgence to repression, never realizing that both extremes are the same trap. And you see this today in modern men. The corporate executive who disciplines himself into exhaustion, waking at 5 a.m., grinding 12-hour days, suppressing every impulse for leisure, for love, for rebellion. He becomes a machine. Until one day the dam bursts, a scandal, an affair, a breakdown. His shadow, denied for too long, rises like a tidal wave. And his discipline, the very thing he thought was his salvation, becomes the cause of his destruction. Masculine rebellion is not about rejecting discipline. It is about refusing the false choice between discipline and desire. It is about reclaiming instinct without being enslaved by it. To acknowledge your rage, your lust, your ambition, not as sins to be crushed, but as energies to be sharpened into weapons. This is why Jung insisted that integration is the path to wholeness. The man who integrates his shadow is not ruled by his anger. He directs it into strength. He is not consumed by his lust. He transforms it into vitality, creativity, and connection. He does not drown in his ambition. He harnesses it to carve his own path instead of suppressing it until it poisons him. This war between discipline and desire is not new. The Stoics sought to tame the passions, to live according to reason alone. Marcus Aurelius wrote of controlling impulse, of mastering anger, of standing above desire. There is wisdom here, but also danger. A life that becomes too rigid, too mechanical, risks losing its fire. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He rejected the Stoic ideal of calm suppression, calling instead for an affirmation of instinct. To say yes to life in its fullness, including its chaos, its danger, its unpredictability. For Nietzsche, the goal was not to strangle desire, but to elevate it, to shape it into creative power. His will to power was not about blind domination, but about transforming raw instinct into strength and greatness. Between the Stoic and Nietzschean paths lies the same paradox Jung described. The shadow must not be denied, nor allowed to rule. It must be confronted and integrated. For the modern man, this war is constant. Every system you inhabit tells you to repress. Work harder, control yourself, be respectable. But beneath that discipline, the shadow waits. And if you never face it, it will claim you. The stronger your discipline, the more violent the rebellion. When the shadow finally breaks free, the lesson is brutal but necessary. Your desires are not your enemy. Your instincts are not weakness. They are raw material. Unrefined, they enslave you. Repressed, they consume you. Integrated, they become your power. The war between discipline and desire is an illusion. Discipline without desire is hollow. Desire without discipline is chaos. But when the two are united, when the shadow is faced and harnessed, a man becomes whole. The path is not rejection, but integration. Strength is not found in chains, nor in indulgence. It is found in mastery. And mastery begins the moment you stop running from your shadow and dare instead to confront it face to face. Every system you live in, work, religion, politics, relies on your shadow staying hidden. Obedience is easy when men are divided against themselves. You think your decisions are personal, the product of free will, but they've been engineered long before you acted. From childhood you were trained, suppress your rage, bury your lust, abandon your ambition. The machine of society works best when men are predictable, when they wear masks and silence their instincts. Carl Jung warned that the shadow grows most dangerous when it's not just repressed by individuals, but by entire civilizations. When a culture denies its own darkness, that shadow doesn't disappear. It returns in the form of war, witch hunts, and mass hysteria. The frightening truth is this: you're not only carrying your own shadow, you're carrying the unspoken shadow of an entire civilization. Jung called this the collective shadow. Just as the individual represses instincts, so too does society. Nations, religions, and tribes push their sins into the dark and project them onto enemies. Instead of admitting violence, they call others violent. Instead of admitting greed, they accuse outsiders of corruption. It is easier for a culture to claim innocence and condemn an other than to confront its own rot. History's bloodiest chapters are born from this denial. Nazi Germany is the most terrifying example. Jung himself described the regime as the shadow of Europe made flesh. The rage, humiliation, and suppressed desires of a defeated people coalesced into a single collective identity, projected outward as hatred. The Jews became scapegoats, the enemy that carried all the darkness. Germans refused to see in themselves. What followed was not the eruption of a single man's madness, but the eruption of an entire society's denied shadow. This is why Jung insisted that the greatest dangers to mankind are not natural disasters, but the unconscious forces within him. When the shadow of millions erupts, it manifests as war, genocide, hysteria. The monster we fear is never out there. It is the reflection of what we bury in ourselves. But the collective shadow is not confined to history books. Look at modern life. The corporate machine doesn't just want your labor, it wants your individuality. The workplace rewards conformity, obedience, the erasure of the authentic self. Aggression must be dressed up as assertiveness. Ambition must be diluted into team spirit. Creativity is funneled into safe, marketable boxes. You are not allowed to bring your whole self to the table. You must wear a persona that fits the system. This is how society castrates the modern man. He is taught to suppress his aggression. But aggression is not mere violence. It is the raw energy of life, the fire that builds, protects, and conquers. Without it, men become hollow. When that fire is denied long enough, it does not vanish. It turns inward. It becomes self-hatred, nihilism, despair. The epidemic of male depression, addiction, and suicide is not just personal, it is cultural. It is the price of a civilization that tells men to amputate half of their being in order to be civilized. Nietzsche saw this long before Jung. He called it herd morality, the morality of the weak, imposed to keep the strong in check. Under herd morality, instincts are rebranded as sins. Pride becomes arrogance. Power becomes tyranny. Passion becomes danger. Men learn to call their strength evil and their weakness good. Entire societies are built on this inversion because it keeps the herd united, compliant, and manageable. But the shadow cannot be erased. Nietzsche warned that when societies suppress strength for too long, resentment festers beneath the surface. That resentment eventually explodes, destroying everything in its path. When a culture refuses to acknowledge its shadow, it doesn't disappear. It becomes a time bomb, waiting for the right moment to detonate. And here lies the brutal reality for you, the modern man. You are not just at war with your own shadow. You are at war with the shadow of your culture, your nation, your time. Every message you receive, from advertisements to politics to religious sermons, carries with it the unspoken demand. Do not look at the darkness. Stay polite. Stay controlled. Stay numb. But the cost of this obedience is staggering. A society that denies its shadow produces men who are broken, docile, and lost. Men who no longer believe in themselves, who drift into nihilism because their instincts have been stripped from them. The truth is harsh, but freeing. If you want to become whole, you must rebel not only against your own repression, but against the repression society has placed on you. To reclaim your shadow is an act of defiance against the entire machinery that thrives on your silence. The invisible chains of society are forged not from iron, but from denial. They bind you by convincing you that your instincts are shameful, your ambition dangerous, your aggression evil. But the moment you see these chains for what they are, they begin to break. Nietzsche wrote, "You must become who you are." Jung added the warning, "If you refuse, your shadow will consume you." The battle is not just personal, it is civilizational, and the man who dares to face his shadow does more than free himself. He becomes a crack in the system's armor, proof that obedience is not destiny,